In a quiet field, officers Judith and Reinert stumble upon the lifeless body of Live. Reinert, who once dated Live in school, is so shaken he vomits on the spot. The police call a local funeral home, run by Live's brother Odd and father Arvid, to collect her body. Despite their grief, they stay professional, though their pain is obvious. During the autopsy, something bizarre happens. When the doctor cuts into Liv's chest, the wound starts bleeding, and she suddenly has a seizure. In a shocking twist, Liv grabs the knife, pulls it out, and screams. Later, she wakes up in the hospital with Odd by her side, confused. Her last memory is of taking a walk 4 days earlier. Dr. Svera confirms Liv is alive and healthy, guessing her heart stopped due to the cold. Arvid calls Odd, asking if Liv seems different now, but Odd doesn't pick up on the hint. Svera tells Liv her tests look good and she's free to go. She heads off to grab a snack. Meanwhile, Judith and Reinert show up to apologize for the mix-up and warn her the media is eager to turn this into a big story. Back home, Arvid avoids seeing Liv, and Odd thinks it's guilt for not realizing she was alive. But Arvid seems more scared than guilty, his eyes locked on a bottle of chloroform, hinting at something darker. As Liv unpacks her things, she realizes her necklace is gone. Odd insists he didn't see it when he found her. Later, she tries some chocolate, but is shocked to find she dislikes it. Something's off. At dinner, Arvid lights a candle and watches her closely. When she freezes for a moment, he gets uneasy and abruptly leaves the room. Hurt by her dad's behavior, Liv decides to take a walk to clear her head. As she heads out, she overhears Odd and Rose upstairs, whispering about how strangely she's been acting. Something isn't right, and everyone seems to notice. Liv grows more frustrated and takes off running, moving incredibly fast without even tiring. In minutes, she reaches the field near the barn where her body was found. The spot is easy to find. The grass avoids it completely. When she touches the ground, memories flood back. Someone grabbed her from behind, injected something into her neck, and stole her necklace. She tried to escape, but collapsed within seconds. Liv rushes to the police station and tells Reinert about the attack, but he dismisses her story. The doctors found no signs of injury. Back at home, Arvid plays an old tape. His late wife's voice fills the room, explaining that if he's hearing this, she's truly gone. She asks him to care for their children and warns him to watch over Liv, hinting that her own darkness might be affecting her daughter. The mystery deepens. When Liv gets home, Arvid starts questioning her, but her strange, shifting eyes freak him out, and he bolts. Confused and upset, Liv vents to Odd, wondering who'd want her dead, why her body was dumped in a field, and why her dad's been acting so weird. Odd, ever the opportunist, jokes that a serial killer in town would be great for business since no one ever dies around here. Later, Arvid calls Liv to his office. After a tense moment, he knocks her out with chloroform, muttering apologies. He drags her unconscious body downstairs, where Odd hears a noise, but only sees his dad. Arvid brushes it off, saying he's just checking on the crematorium, and leaves. When Liv wakes up, she's trapped inside a casket, terrified and desperate for answers. Liv screams and struggles as Arvid ignores her, shoving the casket into the crematorium and igniting the flames, convinced he's saving her. The intense heat sends Liv into a panic, and with a burst of strength, She smashes through the wooden casket. Arvid hears the commotion and peers through the small window, horrified to see his daughter fighting to escape. Desperate, he pulls a lever, lowering a heavy wall to block her exit. But Liv wedges her fingers under it just in time, using incredible force to lift it and crawl free. Stunned to find herself unharmed, she's even more shocked to see her father behind it all. Arvid, filled with guilt, apologizes, explaining he did it to protect her, just as he couldn't save her mother from the same fate. As Arvid moves closer to grab Liv, he claims he has proof at home to back up his accusations. Liv panics and screams. Hours later, Odd gets a call. Arvid is dead. He goes to Liv's room to break the news, and she hugs him tightly, hiding her blood-stained hands. A flashback reveals the truth. Liv, terrified, pushed her dad in self-defense, accidentally sending him tumbling down the stairs. Though it was unintentional, the guilt weighs heavily on her. When Judith and Reinert arrive at the scene, Judith brushes it off as an old man's tragic fall, but Reinert isn't convinced. 2 mysterious deaths in one family in a week. Too suspicious. Odd shows up to collect his father's body, and the sight of Arvid's lifeless form pushes him over the edge. He lashes out at the cops, his grief and anger boiling over. On his way to the morgue, Odd pulls over at a gas station to use the restroom. Overwhelmed, he lets out a scream into a wad of paper towels, trying to release the weight of everything. After delivering the body, he heads to the funeral home, now his to manage. Sitting in the office, he struggles to process it all. While rummaging through a drawer, he finds stacks of bank envelopes and decides to visit the family's financial advisor. The news hits hard. Arvid left behind a mountain of debt, now Odd's responsibility. If he doesn't pay it off in 2 weeks, they'll lose the house. Back at the office, Odd finds the window vandalized with crude graffiti by some kids. Frustrated, he starts scrubbing it clean when Martin shows up. Martin suggests offering discounts to attract more clients and hands him a brochure for sales training classes, leaving Odd with even more to think about. At home, Liv searches her dad's place and stumbles on some old tapes. She listens as her mom describes a dark force growing inside her, one she couldn't control, and begs Liv's dad to step in if Liv ever shows the same signs. Angry and shaken, Liv throws the tape down. When Rose hears the noise and checks on her, Liv brushes her off, hides the tape, and heads to work for a distraction. As a nurse at a retirement home, Liv tries to focus on her tasks. But while drawing blood from an elderly patient, she's mesmerized by the pulse under the woman's thin skin. When the blood flows, Liv zones out, her eyes shifting color. The syringe slips from her hand, and she nearly collapses, until her coworker Mathieu catches her just in time. Something's stirring inside Liv, and it's getting harder to ignore. Liv hurries to the bathroom, her hands trembling as she scrubs at the blood stain on her uniform. It won't come off. Desperate, she tries sucking it off, and for a moment, her eyes shift color. She's oddly drawn to the taste. Staring at her reflection, it hits her. Her mother's warning about the darkness must mean she's turning into a vampire. She's about to suck the stain again when Rose walks in, worried. Liv brushes it off, claiming she just felt dizzy, but Rose isn't convinced and sends her home. Meanwhile, at the morgue, the forensic team makes a chilling discovery. Arvid's ribs are broken, proof he was pushed. Reynard finally believes Live. Someone's targeting the family. Live heads back to the field to look for clues, but comes up empty. Just then, Reinert shows up and tells her he's launching a formal investigation. Live pretends to cooperate, but she's distracted by the veins in his neck, fighting the urge to bite him. When she leans in, Reinert mistakes it for a kiss and moves closer, snapping her back to reality. She quickly pulls away, shaken. Later, Liv visits Sverre, complaining of dizziness. He takes a blood sample to figure out what's wrong. At dinner, Rose raises a toast in memory of Arvid. Odd mentions meeting their financial advisor, but keeps the debt a secret. As he talks, Liv grows increasingly irritated by the sound of his chewing. Suddenly, she loses control, yelling and throwing her fork. Humiliated, she flees to her room, where she notices her eyes have changed color again. Something strange is definitely happening to her. Liv, desperate for answers, watches more tapes and learns her mother would lose control when the kids cried too much, often muttering about needing just a sip of blood. Haunted by this, Liv sneaks out at night to the retirement home. She takes a blood sample from her elderly patient, claiming it's routine, but after cleaning the wound, she can't resist tasting it and likes it. Overcome by guilt, she hesitates, but then drinks from the blood bag. Horrified by her reflection, she stops. As she's about to leave, the old lady suddenly goes into cardiac arrest. Liv tries to save her, but it's too late. The woman dies, leaving Liv shaken and full of dread. Liv hits the emergency button and ducks under the bed just as Mathieu arrives. He tries CPR on the old lady, but quickly gives up, saying a quick prayer before leaving. Once he's gone, Liv tries to sneak out, only to find the door locked and the windows sealed tight. The next morning, Rose comforts Odd as he prepares his father's body for the funeral. Odd almost confesses about his debt, but gets interrupted by a call. He's needed to pick up the old lady's body from the retirement home. Odd can't help feeling relieved. A death means business is coming his way. Meanwhile, Reinert is glued to the town's security cameras, hunting for clues. Judith rolls her eyes, insisting there's no serial killer. Sometimes people just die of natural causes. Judith finally opens up to Reinert, sharing a personal story about her past obsession with a case. She admits she pushed suspects so hard during interrogations that she believes it led to Liv's mother taking her own life. That's why Judith is cautious now. She won't call someone a murderer without solid proof. She also suspects Reinert's obsession with the case isn't just about justice. She thinks he's trying to impress Liv. Meanwhile, Odd and Mathieu enter the dead woman's room to move the body, forcing Liv to hide under the bed again. Odd bends down to pick up a dropped bottle, but luckily he doesn't spot her. When he adjusts the bed, Liv panics, fearing the machinery might crush her, but it stops just in time. After the men leave, Liv tries to slip away, but is stopped by the patient's sons. She quickly pretends she was just doing her job, offers her condolences, and finally escapes. Back home, she pours the remaining blood down the sink, trying to wash away the unease. Later, Odd starts planning the funeral and finds a note from Arvid requesting a damaged, unsellable casket. Odd asks Liv to write a eulogy, but she refuses at first, until she sees how overwhelmed he is and agrees to help. Odd notices something strange. Liv's eyes seem to have flecks of a different color. She brushes it off, but in the bathroom she checks and realizes it's true. Needing air, she goes for a walk to clear her head. Sverre finds her and insists on running more tests, but Live insists she's fine, though it's clear something is changing within her. When Liv gets home, she tries to write the eulogy but can't focus. Her eyes keep drifting to the blood bag in the trash. She shuts the door to block it out, but then a fly buzzes in, its noise piercing her sharp vampire hearing. Overwhelmed, she storms outside, drawn by another sound, the neighbor's lawnmower. Frustrated, she kicks it to shut it off. Turns out the guy running it is Martin, who calls her out for her behavior, making her even angrier. Meanwhile, Reinert is on a date with Judith's niece, a setup by Judith to keep him away from Live. As they drive around, Reinert spots a fight and abruptly stops the car, distracted by the chaos. Live suddenly snaps and starts violently attacking Martin, who pleads for her to stop. She pauses briefly, but then continues hitting him. Reinert steps in to pull her away, but she throws him across the garden like he's nothing. His date rushes to help him, while Liv, realizing she's lost control, flees the scene. Later, at the police station, Reinert documents his injuries as evidence for the family's case. He tries calling Liv, but she ignores him. Judith brushes off his concerns, but Reinert can't shake the memory of Arvid's cracked ribs. Was Liv's sudden, unnatural strength the cause? The mystery deepens. At home, Liv listens to the recordings and discovers her mom had been anxious about her blood cravings and the risk of passing the darkness to her. Suddenly, the lights flicker and Liv feels sick. She runs to the bathroom, vomiting blood and screaming in distress. Sweating and shaking, she shows signs of withdrawal, like an addict desperate for relief. Hallucinations take over, and she's driven to lick traces of blood from the sink. Still craving more, she digs through the trash for the blood bag, drinking the last few drops. It's barely enough, but it soothes her, for now. When Odd arrives to take Liv to the funeral, she realizes she's been cooped up inside for days. Odd assumes it's just her grieving and doesn't think much of it. At the funeral, Odd gets upset over a misspelled ribbon from the flower company, but quickly pulls himself together before guests arrive. Meanwhile, Reinert tries to share his findings with Judith, but she insists he wait until after the funeral. Sverre also tells Liv they need to talk later. During the service, Liv zones out and has to be called several times to give her eulogy. When she finally starts reading, she feels dizzy and keeps hearing her mother's voice whispering, "I need blood." Unable to handle the pressure, Liv runs off, with Reinert chasing after her, while Odd stays behind to finish reading her writings. Later that night, Liv wakes up in the forest, her phone flooded with missed calls from Reinert and her brother. She decides to go to Reinert's place, and when she steps inside, the bright lights sting her eyes. Reinert pulls her into a tight hug, and she can hear his heartbeat pounding loudly. The next morning, Liv wakes up in bed, horrified to find herself covered in blood beside Reinert's lifeless body. Panicked, she covers him with the sheets, scrubs the blood from her mouth, and flees. On her way home, Judith spots her, noticing how on edge she seems. Judith asks if Liv has seen Reinert since he didn't show up for work, but Liv lies, claiming she knows nothing. Odd takes Martin's advice and tries to sell a fancy casket to the old lady's sons by offering a discount, but it backfires. They get even more upset when Odd cracks a poorly timed joke. so they end up buying the cheapest option with no extras, leaving Odd with little profit. Later, Liv shows up, ready to share her own struggles, but Odd beats her to it and finally admits they're about to lose their house. As Liv stares at the plain casket, an idea starts to form. Just then, Rose pops in to say the bank called, and while Odd scrambles to make excuses, Liv quietly swipes some equipment, her mind clearly racing. On her way out, Liv spots Judith at the scene of a car crash. Sverre walks by and reminds Liv to meet him later. They need to talk. Meanwhile, Judith finds something suspicious. Hidden in the books from the crashed van is happy powder. Back at Reinert's house, Liv cleans up the blood, bags the body, and deals with Reinert's ringing phone. Using his face to unlock it, she texts Judith, pretending to be Reinert, and says he's too sick to work. Judith, suspicious, checks his house anyway. When no one answers, she peeks in the garage and finds his car still there. Something's clearly off. Liv grabs the funeral gear and sneaks away with the body before Judith can spot her. In her rush, she misses a bloodstain on the wall. Judith catches sight of Liv crossing the bridge and asks about the package she's carrying. Quick on her feet, Liv lies, saying it's just some things from the family's storage. At the funeral home, Liv unwraps Reinert and notices the bite mark on his neck. To stop any leaks, she covers his head with plastic and tape, then stuffs him into the old lady's casket, hiding him under the sheets. When Odd hears a noise and investigates, Liv casually explains she padded the casket to make it look less empty. Odd buys it, thinking it's a smart move. Liv distracts Odd with a hug, convincing him to close the casket so it can be cremated. Later, Odd joins Martin's business class, but when Martin starts dissecting the funeral home's strengths and weaknesses, Odd loses it. He shouts, "Nobody dies here," and storms out. Meanwhile, Liv visits Sverre for a blood test. He offers to listen to her troubles, but she brushes him off, saying she's fine. That night, Odd almost tells Rose about their money problems, but he holds back when she shares exciting news. She's pregnant. Odd is thrilled with how things are going, but Liv, overhearing from behind the door, feels like her problems might burden the couple. She quietly retreats to her room, where she listens to more tapes. Hearing her mother's voice caring for her as a baby brings her to tears. The next morning, Odd brings her breakfast and shares some news. He convinced the old lady's sons to hold a full funeral by using the baby story. So the casket won't be cremated just yet. It'll be opened for the ceremony. Determined, Liv rushes to the church, but the front door is locked. Odd's already inside preparing. She sneaks in through a window, hiding behind furniture until he leaves the room. In a shocking turn, Reinert suddenly springs to life, leaping out of the casket and bolting from the church. Liv, stunned, chases after him. Meanwhile, Odd shows up with the old lady's family and friends, only to find the casket in chaos after Reinert's escape. The mess is so bad that the family refuses to pay for the service. In the woods, Liv catches up to Reinert, but he turns on her, attacking fiercely. She fights back, landing a few punches, but Reinert overpowers her, slamming her against logs until she collapses. Desperate, Liv grabs a rock and knocks him out cold. The tension is high, and Liv's quick thinking saves her, for now. At the police station, Judith is still uneasy about Reinert and decides to check his office. There, she finds a crumpled photo of Liev tossed in the trash. Just then, Liev shows up and drops a bombshell. She found Reynard in the woods, naked except for a bag over his head. She claims he attacked her out of nowhere, and she knocked him out to defend herself. One officer jokes that Reynard might have been up to something shady, but Judith isn't buying it. She insists the truth will come out once Reynard wakes up. Panicked about what he might reveal, Liev sneaks into his hospital room and silences him for good, smothering him with a pillow. Sverre walks in, calm and collected, and tells Liev to hold on for a moment. Just then, Reynard jolts awake, screaming in panic. Sverre quickly takes charge, drawing some of his own blood and injecting it into Reynard to soothe him. He asks Liev to stand guard outside while he handles the situation. Meanwhile, Odd heads to the bank, excited to share the news that he's going to be a dad. But his joy doesn't sway his financial advisor much. They won't fully extend his loan. Instead, they offer a compromise. If Odd pays $30,000 up front, they'll give him the extension he needs. Frustrated and overwhelmed, Odd stops on his way home and takes out his anger by hurling a bunch of chairs into a pool. As Odd wrestles with what to do next in life, Rose shows up with news. They've got a client. It's Martin, who explains that his cousin died in Sweden, but the family wants to bring him home for burial. Odd hesitates, warning that the death passport and international paperwork will cost a lot. $30,000 to be exact. To his surprise, Martin agrees without a fuss. Meanwhile, Reynard wakes up feeling much better. Just as Judith arrives to question him, Sverre steps in, explaining that Reynard had a psychotic episode and remembers nothing. He adds that Reynard is free to go home now, leaving Judith with more questions than answers. Liv is uneasy about the plan, but Sverre reassures her they'll discuss it privately later. That evening, he visits her and listens to the tapes, confessing he's the one who asked her mother to record them. Here's the twist. Liv's mom once tried to stop consuming blood, but lost her sanity, leading Arvid to bring her to Sverre. He promised to keep her secret and even studied her blood, hoping to unlock the secret behind vampires' rapid healing and eternal youth to create life-saving medicine. But before he could crack the code, Liv's mother ended her own life. She always knew Liv was like her, but stayed silent, wanting her daughter to live a normal life for as long as possible. Sverre lied about hypothermia to protect Liv, but now he's convinced they have to kill Reynard before he starts hurting people by burning him. Liv isn't okay with this and begs for one day to talk to Reynard, hoping he might still be in control of himself. If he's not, she'll agree to Sverre's plan. Meanwhile, the doctor gives them blood samples to keep their hunger at bay. Back at his house, Reynard is losing it as withdrawal symptoms hit hard. At the same time, Judith is digging into the family's case and starts connecting the dots, making her suspicious of Reynard too. Things are heating up. The next morning, Liv whips up some smoothies using the blood. A little spills, and when Odd tastes it, he grimaces. It's awful, but Liv convinces him it's just beets, and he buys it. Later, she heads to Reynard's place. When he doesn't answer the door, she lets herself in. The house is a disaster, and Reynard looks terrible. Liv offers him the smoothie and tries to relate, saying she's been through the same thing, but Reynard brushes her off and bolts. Liv hops on her bike to chase him, but she's no match for his car, and loses him. She checks the police station only to find he's not there either. Judith seizes the moment to question Liv, growing more suspicious of her nervous behavior. Meanwhile, Liv begins scouring the town, only to receive a call from Sverre. He warns her to deliver Reinert's blood soon, or she'll be to blame for more deaths. Back at his office, Sverre experiments by mixing Liv's and Reinert's blood into his own injuries. Elsewhere, Odd crosses into Sweden to retrieve a body, but the morgue staff won't even let him in. They simply tell him to return that night, as the body isn't ready yet. Tensions rise as secrets and urgency collide. That evening, a new employee shows up in a flashy, expensive car, catching Odd's attention. The guy casually mentions he makes his money selling high-end caskets, convincing grieving families it's what their loved ones chose before passing. Before Odd can process this, a morgue doctor announces the body is ready. Odd loads it into a casket, surprised by how heavy it is for such a skinny guy. Curious, he asks the doctor about the cause of death, but she brushes him off, reminding him his job is just to drive. On the road, Odd's unease grows, and he pulls over to check the body himself. Something feels off. Odd investigates the autopsy wound and finds illegal drugs stashed under the skin. Furious, he calls Martin, who laughs at him, saying no one would pay $30,000 for a regular corpse. Martin reminds Odd he's in no position to argue. Desperate, Odd plays along. At the border, he cranks up the car's heat to amplify the rotting smell. The cops check his paperwork, assume the dogs are reacting to the body's stench, and let him pass without a second thought. Shortly after, Odd hands over the body to Martin, who quickly pays him in cash. Martin's partner checks the body to make sure the powder inside is still good. Overwhelmed by guilt, Odd hides in the gas station bathroom for 2 hours, trying to clear his head. An employee gets worried and calls the police. When Judith shows up to see what's wrong, Odd claims he's stressed about money. Judith suggests he sell his storage unit, but when Odd says he doesn't have one, she grows even more suspicious of Liv. In town, Liv is desperately searching for Reinert, but starts feeling dizzy and has to drink most of her smoothie to steady herself. She ignores Sverre's calls, so he decides to join the search. Meanwhile, Reinert, overwhelmed by hunger, finally snaps and chases after a child on the street. The kid trips, gets hurt, and the sight of blood sends Reinert into a frenzy. Just as he's about to attack, Sverre shows up, injects him with something to knock him out, and reveals he's the one who did the same to Liv earlier. When Liv finally arrives at the scene, drawn by her sharpened hearing, Sverre and Reinert are gone. All she sees is blood on the ground, and her mind jumps to the worst possible conclusion. Liv quickly calls Sverre, who reassures her that Reinert has been stopped and tells her to head to the old barn. When she arrives, Sverre hands her a bottle of blood, instructing her to feed Reinert to keep him calm before they set the barn on fire. Inside, Liv finds Reinert unconscious and chained to the wall. But then she hears a noise. Sverre has locked the door with extra chains, trapping her inside. He plans to kill them both. The windows are blocked, but Sverre manages to slip the necklace back to Liv through a small gap before setting the barn ablaze. Liv climbs onto a chair to reach a high window, but the chair snaps, sending her tumbling down. In that moment, she remembers the bottle and quickly opens it, releasing the strong scent in front of Reinert to wake him. The smell works. Reinert goes wild, breaking free from his chains and the wooden post he's tied to. Liv stays on the move, dodging his attack just as he lunges at her, sending him crashing through the blocked window. Now free to escape, Liv spots Sverre trying to run and takes off after him. She catches up, tackling him to the ground in a fury. Sverre, panicked, starts spouting excuses to save himself. Sverre believed Liv would survive the fire and that his blood could give her a normal life. But Liv, blinded by rage, lashes out and chokes him, only stopping when he reminds her she's not a killer. Overwhelmed, she breaks down in tears and releases him, only for Reinert to show up and attack Sverre too. In a desperate attempt to calm Reinert, Liv gives him the blood from the bottle, but it's too late. Sverre dies, and Reinert, now clear-headed, is overcome with guilt and grief. Together, Liv and Reinert take Sverre's body to the funeral home, both weighed down by the tragedy. Liv explains that the embalming machine removes blood from a body and replaces it with chemicals. She realizes they can use it to drain Sverre's blood for their needs and later cremate his body. As the machine works, she fills every jar she can find. Once finished, they stash the body in Reinert's police car trunk. Meanwhile, Odd, overwhelmed by guilt, can't sleep. He heads to the office and burns the stolen money. Liv shows up, looking for the crematorium keys, but ends up talking to Odd instead. He confesses the bank is about to take their house, and the only way to save it is if someone pays for a lavish funeral. Liv comforts someone, assuring them things will get better. Outside, Judith meets Reinert in his car, excitedly telling him she's close to cracking the Arvid case. She catches a foul smell, but brushes it off, thinking Reinert passed gas, and leaves. Later, Liv returns and insists they won't cremate Sverre, because Odd deserves a proper funeral. Reinert resists at first, but Liv reminds him he's a cop and can tweak the evidence if needed. The next morning, Reinert overhears Judith at the station discussing the family case. She now believes her past suspicions about Liv's mother might have been justified after all. The quiet is shattered when the hospital calls. Sverre has been found dead at home. Odd gets the same news and can't hide his delight. Soon after, Odd shows up at the doctor's house to collect the body. Reinert, the cop, shrugs it off as natural causes. Sverre was old, overworked, and drank too much. Odd notices Sverre's body looks surprisingly fresh, but doesn't question it. Later, Reinert tells Judith everything seems normal and no autopsy is needed. But Judith isn't convinced. Something feels off. At home, Liv hides the tapes and drinks Sverre's blood like it's her morning coffee. Reinert shows up, overwhelmed, saying he can't keep going. Liv reassures him, promising they'll figure things out. But when he misreads her kindness and tries to kiss her, she pulls back, leaving him feeling used. Hurt, Reinert storms off. Meanwhile, at the funeral home, Odd charms Sverre's sister, bragging about how close he was to Sverre and pointing out all the luxurious things Sverre loved. She's convinced to splurge on the fanciest casket and top-tier funeral service. Once she's gone, Odd celebrates the big sale by dancing around Sverre's body, blasting music like he's at a party. Liv is happy to see Odd in good spirits, but her concern grows when Odd realizes Sverre's body isn't stiff yet. He considers reporting it to the police, but Liv reminds him that an investigation could delay the funeral money they desperately need. Reluctantly, Odd stays silent. That night, Liv tries calling Reinert to mend things, but he ignores her call. She leaves a heartfelt message assuring him she cares. Meanwhile, Odd, weighed down by guilt, interrupts Rose during the embalming preparations to confess the truth, unable to keep it buried any longer. The next morning, Liv wakes up to Odd and Rose arguing loudly. Rose insists Odd should prioritize his family, but Odd worries about losing his job if he doesn't report everything to the police. Overwhelmed, Liv bolts out of the house. Meanwhile, at the police station, Judith gets the green light from her boss to perform an autopsy on Sverre. If the results point to foul play, Liv could be arrested. As tensions rise, Liv finds Reinert and pulls him aside, desperate to figure out their next move. Things get heated, and Liv calls Reinert a murderer, which stings him so badly that he walks away. Later, Liv heads home and finds Odd and Rose patching things up. Overcome with guilt, she shows Odd her necklace and confesses that Sverre attacked her, leading to his death in self-defense, though she leaves out the whole vampire part. Liv wants to come clean to the police to avoid an autopsy and let Sverre rest in peace. But before Odd can respond, Judith bursts in to arrest Liv. Drama. Before she leaves, she tells Odd to send the body to the morgue, cutting him off before he can respond. Liv spends the night locked in a cell. The next morning, Reinert visits her, and Liv admits Arvid was right. Keeping vampires alive is more trouble than it's worth. Reinert suggests they flee to another city together, but as they step out of the cell, Judith catches them. Thinking fast, Reinert acts like he's interrogating Liv. Just then, they get a call from the morgue. Sverre's body has already been embalmed, making an autopsy impossible. Odd secretly finishes the job to protect his sister, Liv, before delivering the body. When Judith confronts him, Odd plays it cool, claiming he did everything as planned, and scolds her for not letting him explain earlier. Overhearing this from the window, Liv is moved to tears by her brother's sacrifice. Soon she's released, and Sverre's lavish funeral not only honors him, but also saves Odd's struggling business. Even the cops show up, but Judith remains suspicious, convinced something's off. After the funeral, Odd and his sister return home. Odd tries to act like everything's normal, but he can't shake the memory of embalming Sverre's body, only to find it completely drained of blood. Now, he can't stop glancing at his sister, his mind racing with questions about what she's hiding. Something feels off, and he's determined to figure it out.